with an editor. This discussion is about everything our editors wish we would know, and just a discussion about what editing is and how to get the best out of the editing process. We have Valentine Wheeler with us. Hi, Val.
Hi.
And we have Zelda Knight.
Hey
Hi.
everyone.
And we should have Jerry Wheeler joining us soon. So, hi, Jerry, when you get here. So, to kick things off, I'd like both of you to introduce yourselves, tell us sort of a little bit about how you came into editing, what you edit, and just, what it is that about editing that really draws you to it, because it can be a very thankless job. So I think you need to be passionate about some part of it to even want to inflict it upon yourself, right? So let's start with Zelda.
Hi everyone. How did I get into editing? I originally, when I was in college, I was pursuing a history degree. It was a minor in English, so I got very involved in, club activities and things like that when it came to editing our school's literary magazine, a little journal. And after I graduated, I continued doing writing, writing and other things like that. And so, how I really got into genre fiction editing, which is what the majority of what I do now, which is short fiction, usually novella length and shorter, is really getting involved with my small press, Aurelia Leo, and the other part of your question, why do you still inflict it on yourself? Is because I just can't get enough of seeing new work. I guess, because it's one thing to see work like once it's all packaged and pretty and, everything's, there for you to consume, but it's just nothing like just getting, this fresh manuscript and just, being one of the first, if not sometimes the first, never be the very first. I send the very first draft to an editor, but, being some of the first people to see a work that has a lot of potential. So I think that's why I continue to edit to this day.
I love your enthusiasm. We can just hear it in your voice, and that's really awesome. Valentine, why your turn?
So I started getting into editing because I was a writer and I have a critique group that well, it's not so much a critique group as a cheerleading group, really, but we call it a critique group. And so I spent a lot of time working on friends' works and having them work on mine. And I did a lot of submitting to short fiction venues and got a lot of really good feedback from the editors. And I said, you know what, this actually looks like more fun than writing, which I don't know if I was right, but it's certainly different. So I edit, I'm the managing editor of Wizards in Space magazine this year.
Oh, that's very cool.
And I also, isn't it, I know our latest issue is beautiful. They're all beautiful, but the latest one's especially beautiful. I also edit Mermaids Monthly magazine. I'm one of the editors on that. And I slush read for Diabolical Plots. And I have previously slush read for Strange Horizons. And I really like editing because, similarly to Zelda, I love to see something that I know has a spark in it that could be something no one's ever seen before. And that might be it might be the style, it might be the tone, it might be a unique story idea I've never seen before, but one of those elements is there and it just needs to be tweaked in a different element. Um, I found that a really, really satisfying experience. And also because I slush read for a bunch of different venues, I've been able to say, this isn't exactly what we're looking for here, but here's a list of other places that I know would love to see this. And short fiction is a matchmaking game. It's not a competition. And that I think is the thing that I found the most satisfying is finding that perfect match of what you wrote is exactly what I want for this.
That's really cool. Just briefly, for anyone watching who might not be aware, what is slush reading?
Oh, sorry. That is when you submit to a magazine that has a lot of people submitting. It goes into a pile, which is traditionally called the slush pile. That's every story that we didn't specifically ask you to write for us or send for us. That's true for novels, it's true for agents, and it's true for publishers and other venues. And in all the case of all the magazines I have read for, it's pretty much the first, I don't want to say the first line of defense, but it's the first gate you have to pass. It's when we have submissions open at Wizards in Space, we'll get 500, 600 submissions within 5 or 6 weeks, and I'll read every single one of them, and about 40% of them will make it to the rest of the editing team. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the ones that made it were the best ones in terms of technical skill, but it's the ones that had that special something that I kept thinking about. And then we have to have a big long fight about which of those 200 stories actually gets published in our 20-story magazine.
I'm kind of awed by what you've just said. Like, if you're reading 500 or 600 stories, like, how would you remember them all? How would you even do that? Which actually leads nicely into our first official question. Walk us through your typical editing process. What do you do when you first open a new manuscript, and how many times you read it, etc.? So let's throw this over to Zelda. Talk us through your process.
Yeah, so I usually for short fiction versus novels, I have a little different process. For short fiction, I rarely actually read the cover letter first. I dive straight into the story. And so
Mhm.
I typically read the story in its entirety. It's very rare, like, issues like actual document issues. I don't read the full story before I give, myself, is this a pass or should I come back to it? And because I'm a one woman shop, I don't have like a slush team. So basically, I'm my own slush reader slash final editor. So I go through all the submissions. Then I narrow it down to basically say, okay, this is stuff that would fit my magazines. And then from there, I try to block stuff. I don't have a thematic thing with any of my literary magazines. It's more just genre. But I try to block it so you don't get like just straight horror or just straight fantasy
Mhm.
or stuff that is like if you read back to back you'd be like what is going on. It has to have like some type of flow to it. And I usually, because I publish mostly quarterlies, I block it off for the whole year. So once I open, and then after I accept, it's for that entire year. So I open once a year and then it's pretty much over. For novels, it's a little different. I actually read the cover letter right away because a lot of times I can see stuff like, I'm pitching you this nonfiction book on dinosaurs and I publish sci-fi fantasy. I'm not about to, read 10,000 words of a novel that's totally off base. But then after that, little tweak of actually reading the cover letter, it's pretty much the same process versus I'm not like publishing a magazine for the year. It's pretty much, is this something I want to invest a lot of money into to get out into the world? And that's kind of the only real tweak was novel and submissions.
Okay, that sounds great to me. Val, your turn.
So that's really interesting what you said about the cover letter because we have an incredibly similar process that we we don't actually have a cover letter field. We kind of hate cover letters because I hate writing them, basically. So instead, we have what we've labeled just the background field, which is actually an idea I stole from another magazine. Don't tell them, but basically, it says, "Tell us anything we need to know. If you're a deep sea scuba diver and this is about horrifying tentacles from the depths, please tell us that. If your main character is a deaf queer woman and you're a deaf queer woman, please tell us that." And that sort of information, we really want it, but we want to read the story first. And once we've read it, we can say, oh, well, this person said, I'm a 50-year-old history teacher uh, in Michigan writing about, I don't know, undersea diving from on another planet. And I'll be like, that's great, because I saw interesting world building about the history of the people who died and all that, and it sort of gives you a little more depth to it. So sorry, that put me on a tangent because I started thinking about underwater history. Sorry. But
Hey, tangents are good. We are here for the tangents.
good. But for Wizards in Space, we'll read the whole story. Once it makes it to our later rounds, usually we do about 3 or 4 rounds, depending on the pool that makes it to round 2. That's when we bring the whole team together, and we've got a team of right now 6 people, and we'll discuss, at this point, we discuss every single story that makes it to round 2. That probably won't continue because we keep getting more submissions and our meetings are just very long at this point. And as we go through the submissions for the issue, we talk about, much like Zelda said, the things that sort of are too thematically similar, or the things that really would be a really hard transition within the same book. We did a issue that the theme, we have very loose themes, and our theme was cycles, and we had got so many death stories, and we had to, there were probably 15 that were perfect, but we had to narrow it down to 1 or 2 because you can't do that to people. And I think it's really important that we read all of the stories, because we've definitely had the entirety of the stories, because we've definitely had pieces that for the first 1,000 words we've said, oh no, definitely not, and then they've done something that's just been a magical twist. And if you have that, you can make the rest work. So basically the same process.
I was
all I have to say.
Yeah, I was very briefly a slush reader for Entangled, and I noticed a lot of readers started their story before the story. Like you'd read the first 2 or 3 chapters and nothing would happen, and then chapter 4 it all kicked off. So that actually leads into another question, sort of what are common mistakes that you see in the manuscripts or stories that come your way that, authors need to be more aware of? Oh, before we get into this, sorry, I'd just like to say to the audience, if you've got any questions for Zelda and Val and Jerry when he joins us, feel free to put them into the chat. I'll read them out, and we'd love to have them. Also, any tangents, feel free to throw them our way. So author mistakes that more people need to be aware of.
I would say the 3 biggest mistakes I see, I just ran into this one because I'm slush reading for an upcoming anthology with 2 other wonderful editors, is not the story itself, but technical mistakes. Like they send a document that I can't open, or I say specifically, I need this document. And they send which is not bad. Like most of the time I do open it to it, but they'll send a rich text file. And I'm like, that's not what the submission said. I need this type of document. So I see a lot of not basic mechanics of sending submissions. I get errors, and so then I can't read the story, which is not good. So I don't really like that. The second thing I see all the time, which is very frustrating, is not submitting something that makes sense for the magazine or the press. So for example, now it's kind of expanded over time, but originally I was strictly sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. And I would get stuff that was not sci-fi, fantasy, or horror. And it's not like I have very strict definitions, but it's also if this is quite frankly not even in the realm of speculative fiction, I don't publish it. That's not what I do. So that's the second biggest thing is, just not submitting something that's appropriate. And then the last thing I see all the time is, and this one doesn't really trip me up, but I think every editor is different, is something that's not thoroughly edited enough. And that sounds strange, but you should be at the very least doing a thorough self edit before you submit to an editor, which seems kind of backwards, but we're not, how do you say, there's different types of editors. And while some editors do more line editing, so going sentence by sentence, copy editing is also called, than others, that is not really the job. We're more, kind of big picture editors, kind of taking stories and then, putting them together for a magazine. So if I have to do really heavy line edits for something, I'm
Mm-hmm.
most likely 9 times out of 10 not going to accept it because that's a lot of work to do. A lot of times unpaid. So that's why I think a lot of times that's the other big mistake I see.
Yeah, I would agree with definitely all of those. For our magazines, for both of the magazines that I'm heavily involved with right now, we'll often take on one piece that needs heavy edits per issue. And so if you haven't been through and edited it really seriously yourself, you have to, there's a much higher barrier to entry. And the only exception there would be if English is not your first language, if you're a very young writer, and that would be something you would tell us, because that's something we would really like to know. We would want to know. The other thing for me that really grinds my gears, as they say, is most venues have a list of hard no's somewhere, or they've written extensively on their Twitter or on their Facebook or wherever their submission guidelines are. We don't publish this. Um, we appreciate that this is important to be written, but in our case, we're in school libraries. Don't send us erotica. Um, we, when I was at Strange Horizons, there was a great list of like, don't send us zombies. We have too many zombies. We have too many cannibals. Please stop sending us cannibals. Which, may I just say, please stop sending us cannibals also. Um, so paying attention, I guess it really rolls into what Zelda was saying, but paying attention to where you're submitting, and not only what do they want, but what don't they want. Um, if we say hard stop at 3,500 words, don't send us 3,600 words. Edit it if you have to, but if the story can't be told in 3,500 words, then it's not for us. Um, we have gotten some novel submissions to our literary magazine that is this big. So don't do that.
Yeah. Zelda has already answered this, I feel, but this is a question from Jerry. Do you prefer developmental or copy editing?
I like both. I it depends what I'm doing it for. I really like to see a story get polished. I really like to go from this is interesting to this is great. And I think both of those are really important parts of it. But I think something that I struggle with is separating those two kinds of editing. So for me, it's, you know, it's hard to say which I like better, because I have a hard time doing the developmental without doing the copy editing, which is something I need to work on, because why polish stuff you're going to cut out? But
So I've just thought of something. My feeling is that it's very hard for an author to do their own developmental editing because you really need an outside perspective to do that. Would you say it is possible for an author to do their own copy editing?
yes.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you,
No,
but yeah, no,
I was
I
read
think
it aloud. Yeah.
yeah, do it. Do copy editing.
Yeah.
Awesome. So read it aloud. That's one really good piece of copy editing advice. Anything else?
For me, no, it might come off as a little surprising, but I am dyslexic. So editing is actually harder for me than most people. And one tip I always give people is to use free softwares that are text to speech, like natural readers online and stuff that have human voices. it can't obviously catch homophones, so tutu and all that stuff. Like you gotta, really focus. But I find a lot of times I'm the person that makes really clunky sentences because I like a
Mhm.
little too much purple prose. And so when I hear it read out to me, and I'm like, wow, that's way too much information for one sentence. I start using semicolons and breaking stuff up. So I really recommend that. Not even if you have dyslexia, but hearing something out loud versus your own voice sometimes really
Mhm.
helps too.
Oh, we've just had a question from Jamie. Jamie is another New Zealander and they're up very early. It's only 7:21 a.m. here. Hi, Jamie. What kind of story or theme would you love to see more of? So we know we don't want zombies and cannibals. What do we want?
I'm always up for found family. I'm always up for complex queer stories that aren't. I mean, I love a coming out story. I love I was going to say a straight up romance, but a straightforward romance. But I would love to see more complicated romances, more stories about queer queer platonic romances, more stories about community and people having to live with the people around them for a long time. I was just in Glenn's reading, and he was talking. He was reading through his book that's about a small town that has very long-term complex relationships between people, and that's really what I want, especially in my speculative fiction. I mean, I want to see more stories about people against unusual backdrops. I don't want the backdrop to be the story, I think. Also, uh, people trapped in rooms together having to work out their issues. That I really want to see.
I'm
I
at the
am down for all of that.
I'm at the out myself part, but also I'm a sucker for forced proximity. Give me all types of forced proximity. I can't get enough. I honestly can't, especially when it's two people that don't like each other in forced
Mhm.
proximity. Woo. But other than just my personal taste, I do feel that one thing I love seeing is actually love stories. Like I'm a romance writer, but not always just romantic stories. I feel like a lot of times I read stories and they're devoid of just basic love between family, basic love between friends, just,
Mhm.
I'm a loner too, but like, man, just loving their cats, their animals. Like, I feel like I just want more love stories. Like, I want people to go through things, but I don't want them to go through it totally alone. Like, I maybe not, super complex small town setting isn't maybe my cup of tea, but hey, if you just love watering your plants, like just throw that in there.
Mhm.
I know this is like a space story, things are a little bit more complicated there, but like give me something where you're attached to something. I really, really
Yeah,
love those in
how
all
people
my
connect.
spectrum.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep, I've heard from Jerry. We're working through some technical issues and he should be with us soon. But while we wait for him to join us, we've got a really awesome question here from Bethany.
Mm.
Once you're sure you want to include a certain work in your next issue/anthology, how many times do you read the piece before you start suggesting edits? Or do you pick out things to edit per pass?
Zelda, I think you're muted.
Huh. Is that Yeah, I think that one's kind of hard to say because I do think I read something in full before I decide, and then like the read again once I trim stuff down. But I think as soon as I accept something, I already have in my head, I'm already editing it. So, I'm already, marking it up and track changes and stuff. So I don't think I have a certain amount of times I read it again. It's as soon as I know I accept it, I start editing right away.
Yeah, we will usually. I'll read it in the slush. I'll pass it up to the rest of the team. The whole team will read it. Usually in that slush round, unless something is like absolutely stellar, beautiful, I can't think of anything it needs. I'll leave comments on it in our submission system saying, "I love this. This is how we can make it better." And not is it worth taking, is it worth the work, but is this work we can take on? Is this something that someone besides me is also excited about? And then as it makes it through the rounds, we add comments and we sort of add on what else we want to change on it. So usually something gets read by me 3 times, by the person doing the final edits on it probably 2 times, and then by everyone else once. So it gets about 10 reads total.
Awesome. So we have Jerry with us. Hi, Jerry.
Hello, how are you? The website said it was at 3 o'clock my time, and it's only 1:30.
Oh, no.
Um,
Well, we are glad to
So
have you with us.
I'm very glad to be here. Thank you.
So since Jerry has just joined us, Jerry, please introduce yourself and give us your editing background and what it is about editing that keeps you coming back to it.
Well, my name is Jerry Wheeler. I have worked for Bold Strokes Books as an editor for the last 10 years, about 300 books. I also do freelance work. And what keeps me coming back to it? I I guess I just like correcting errors. And helping authors realize their potential and the potential of the manuscript.
Yeah, I really, really love that. But I like how you mentioned both helping authors realize the potential, but also correcting errors. Confession time. My first original fiction, I gave it to some friends to read, got some very valid criticism, and then argued with them. So it took me a couple of years before I was actually willing to accept criticism and realize, I could learn from the editing process. I didn't have to fear
Right.
it and kind of welcome that feedback. What advice would you give to authors, particularly new authors, to kind of manage their expectations around the editing process? And let's start with Val this time.
Expectations I would ask people to manage is, you read a lot of stories about people's first book getting picked up, making $1 million, like that. It's not going to happen unless your mom is, also making $1 million a book, or you have some kind of magic connection, or yeah, there's a 1 in a million, but don't expect it to happen. Expect that you're going to have to work. You're going to have to get told no. You're going to have to improve. I mean, I personally have trunked, put on the shelf 3 or 4 novels that have not been up to snuff. And I've had a story that I submitted, I think it had 18 submissions on it, just got bought about 6 weeks ago. So you never know, but you gotta learn to take no, and to take, like Jillian said, to take criticism and know that it's not criticism of you. It's criticism of the fit, and it's criticism of things that you could learn to improve, and you can always get better. So.
Yeah, that's really valuable advice. Zelda, how would you recommend authors manage their expectations?
I think this is very pointed to me as well, so I'm not coming after anybody, but I think also understand that an editor is not a magician. If a manuscript isn't ready, it's just not ready. And I think a lot of times, when especially as a new writer, I thought like maybe the missing sauce was like getting like a really good editor. Maybe that was what was missing, but really it was like going to betas and them just saying like, this is not working. Like this is not working for genre expectations. This is not working
Mhm.
for flow and things. And while that is, developmental editing, in a sense, yeah, it's just sometimes it's not ready to be submitted and get that copy edited. So like sometimes the manuscript is just not ready. It's not that it's bad. It just needs more work.
Awesome. So over to you, Jerry.
Well, most of the manuscripts that I work on, especially those for Bold Strokes, are already vetted. I mean, the contract's already signed, so it's just my job to see what I can do to make them better. Freelance work is something else entirely. And occasionally I have had to go back to an author and say, I just don't think this is ready for me yet. I could go ahead and charge you boku dollars in order to tell you that, but let me just go ahead and tell you that up front. And hopefully, by the time you do get it ready, that's when I can charge you boku dollars.
That actually leads really nicely into a question that Jerry gave us. How do you break bad news to authors? So who wants to go first on this one?
Why? Well, since it's my question.
Fair enough.
Again, it depends for me on whether or not it's a Bold Strokes book or whether it's a freelance book. If it's a Bold Strokes book, I can always make the publisher the bad guy. Especially if, say, an example that I can think of is that very recently I was working on a manuscript for Bold Strokes, and the author had said something disparaging about deaf people. Now, that was totally in character, and it certainly worked in the context of what we were doing, but Bold Strokes has rules about sensitivity, cultural sensitivity. So I pretty much said, I'm sorry, you can't say this. And he's like, but it goes to character. And I said, don't care. I can't let it go by, because then I will get in trouble with my bosses. So we're going to have to find another way to work around that. If I ran into that situation as a freelancer, I would be beholden to give the same information and say something to the effect of, if I let this go by and not say anything and you were crucified on Goodreads, I wouldn't be doing my job. At that point, the author can either take my advice or tell me that I'm an idiot. And I've had both of those things happen. So it depends. It depends largely upon where the manuscript that I'm working on comes from.
Zelda, as publisher, you don't have the excuse of making the publisher the bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm telling you, this one woman shop is really bad when you have to say bad news, because you get the brunt of everything. I think bad news is usually just a rejection. That's usually the height of it. And most of the time, I don't really get anything back. I can literally count them on my hand. It was 4 times I've gotten something totally, off the wall in response from a rejection. But there are times I've been more upfront now versus when I first started, but there have been times where I've received just some very questionable work. And I think if they knew that I was a Black woman, they would not have submitted it to me. So I think that's when things get a little bit more interesting, because I do feel responsibility to most, like 99% of the time, it's not the author's own views, it's the character. I mean, you read characters say crazy things all the time. Even say crazy. But it's sometimes you just got to set those boundaries, and that's when it gets a little interesting, I would say. And so I have not learned a good strategy. I'm just really happy we communicate over email, and it's a lot less stakes involved than confronting someone face to face.
I actually had 2 rejections from Sam Hine Press early in my writing career, and those rejections were absolutely wonderful. I submitted a piece for a space opera anthology, and the first editor said, read it, enjoyed it. Don't think it's a fit for the anthology, but I mentioned it to another editor and she's interested in it, so I'm going to send it to her. So that was the first rejection, and it was lovely, right? That is exactly what an author wants to hear. Second editor was like, yeah, I really enjoyed this. Don't think it's quite there yet. Not exactly, fit for Sam Hine, but thank you for submitting it. All the best in your writing career. And I was like, oh, I have a writing career. So those rejections were actually, they made me feel, I'm a professional author. I've been rejected. And I was actually really pleased with that. Val, working with a team, is there one person who's like the bad news person, or is it a shared responsibility?
It's usually me. Usually me. Because I'm the oldest member of the team. I'm the only member who's a parent on the team, so I sort of have to sometimes put on my grown-up pants and be the mean one. But one thing we do at Wizards in Space, at least, is everything that makes it to our last round gets a personal rejection, and we say this is how this can be better. And sometimes we even say, this is the specific reason we couldn't take this. These are some venues that we think would be interested in it. We don't know because we don't work for them, but give them a try. We also do a lot of rejections that say, we would love to hear from you again. And our general rejection letter is very nice. We have never sent one that says we don't want to hear from you again, but we definitely try and encourage people, especially we get a lot of very young submitters because we sort of came out of fandom, and so there's a lot of people who are submitting their first ever work. I think we did a survey a couple issues ago, and I think something like 50% of our published authors, it's their first ever publication, which is really nice. And I think the youngest person we published was like 14. We had to get permission from their mom to send them a check.
That is fantastic.
Yeah. But we do, like I said before, take usually about one thing an issue that needs heavy editing. And that's always sort of a little bit of a crapshoot whether it's going to go over well. So we'll usually send in the acceptance letter, we really like this. We would really like to work on it with you. Here's the things that we want to work on. You don't have to take this offer. It's sort of an R&R, revise and resubmit request, but it's more, are you willing to have us revise this? And it might change your vision for it, but there's something in it that's powerful that we want. We just want to fix it, which is, why you edit, because you want to fix it.
We've actually got.
I, in my own life, have an R&R out with an agent that's been out for like 8 months because I can't bear to deal with her feedback. So, I'm not exactly walking the walk, but.
So we've got a question here from Jerry that I think ties really well into this tangent. How much reworking of a sentence or a paragraph or a document is too much? So Jerry, again, as this is your question, do you have an answer?
Yes. I think when it starts to sound like me rather than the author, that's when it's too much. That's when I have to dial it back and say, no, the sentence structure is fine. He may have used that sentence pattern before, but that's not, don't go inserting your own sentence patterns into the paragraph. Sometimes it's called for, but I think anybody who's worked on a manuscript knows that there comes a point at some point that it doesn't sound like the author anymore. You're not using the author's language. What I try to do instead of inserting my own is I try to rearrange things using the same phraseology that the author uses. When it comes to inventing new stuff, that's when I kind of have to draw the line. I mean, I'll do it and then I'll cross it out.
That makes a lot of sense to me. That sounds good advice to keep in mind when editing. Val or Zelda, do you have anything to add?
I really love that. I really love that. That's a really good firm line that I'm definitely going to steal and use with my own team. So thank you for that. I will credit you. But yeah, we edit. I end up editing a lot of things from people whose experience is very different than mine, and I think that is one of the most important things to remember is making sure that it still sounds like it's coming from their experience and not from mine. You know, I'm a non-binary white person from Massachusetts. I'm not going to be able to do a good job editing if I'm adding things in to someone whose experience is totally different from mine. I recently helped as an editing consultant on the Black Girls Create anthology, and that was a really interesting experience for both me and my other white teammate. Of, oh my God, that teapot is amazing.
I was just because I love that teapot.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Anyway, it was a very good experience in saying, what am I bringing to this piece? What is my instinct to take out of this piece, and why? And so, yeah, it's that's such a good way to put it. I'm delighted by it. Making sure it still sounds like them.
So do you have anything to add, Zelda?
No, not really. I think that was sufficient. Yeah, I think it's a line I sometimes cross too much, but I've never gotten complaints about it because I think a lot of times, even if I do change a lot, I do more of a rearranging than anything else because I know my tendency to put too many words into sentences, and I think the authors that submit are a lot like me for some reason. So a lot of times it's just, hey, take this 50-word sentence and let's condense it. And they're like, this sounds better. And I'm like, but yeah, I think I do need to do more of that because just, sometimes the sentence just needs to be long, and it's no issue with it just being long.
So on that note, how do you deal with it? And this is not Zelda specifically, this is a question for everyone. How do you handle it when you've done a lot of work editing a piece or giving some really well thought out and detailed critique and advice, and the author just rejects it totally?
I don't think I've had anything rejected that was like to that extent. I've done a lot of editing with authors. I do usually track changes, and we chat together and stuff. But I do know sometimes I'm like, why did I edit if they're just gonna cut out the paragraph? Like that that frustrates me because then like they'll reread it and be like, let's just cut this out. I'm like, I spent so much time trying to make it work. But yeah, I think for the most part, I think authors are really, at least what's how I work in Google Docs, are usually pretty much like they'll reject some things, but for the most part, they'll accept most of the changes. So I usually don't, I'm not too frustrated. The only time is when they like actually delete something that I spent a lot of time editing, and then I'm just like,
Yeah, we don't get a lot of folks who absolutely just reject our edits. I know that we've had a couple of folks when we've done that letter saying this is going to take a lot of work, but we're happy to do the work, say, nah, I think it's perfect the way it is. Young Jillian's. But
Yeah.
and that's fine. If you don't want us to pay you for your work, then we won't pay you for your work. um, it's submit to us again when you have something that you think we'll like, and maybe this time it'll be closer to what we're looking for. So, you know, it's a pain to do a lot of work and have it thrown away, but in the end, I don't want to call it a business transaction, but it sort of is. It's not, they're not throwing away my, you know, heartfelt confession of love. They're throwing away my, you know, the work I did. I got paid for it, and you know, didn't want it.
Exactly. I mean, it's, again, my split is between bold strokes and between freelancing. With bold strokes, most of the authors that I've worked with for a long time, and they're pros, they're professionals. They've got 4 or 5 books under their belts, and even the new authors that I get from bold strokes, I don't really have any problem with, because I think a lot of that is the way that you phrase the feedback.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I always try to find at least one good thing for one bad thing. You know, for every correction, I mean, major correction that I make. And with bold strokes, I mean, I get the advantage of getting the manuscripts way early. So I actually have time to go through and say, this doesn't really quite work. Can we go ahead and work on this major portion while I wait for you to come up on the calendar so that I could do the detail work later? I just had that experience with a manuscript that is 127,000 words long. And I'm like, really needs to be between 80 and 100. So I identified some problems. I said, okay, you need to drop a plot line. We need to rewrite the first 3 chapters. You know, can you have this done? Can you have this done in 3 months? And it's amazing when I give feedback like that, which is not often. You know, I expect a lot of pushback, but this guy was like, okay, all right, when do we start?
That is awesome.
Yes, and you know, it was a good manuscript. It was a good story, but it just needs a lot chipped away. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. We have 2 minutes left in this panel, so very briefly.
Oh no, I'm having fun.
I know, right?
I'm really sorry that I'm late.
Hey, we are in all different time zones, all different places. If this is like the worst thing that happens today, we will be doing fantastic. So I would like to follow up with you, Jerry, and do a very quick, just one-on-one interview with the questions that you missed. And so I'll be in touch with you via email about maybe that possibility later.
Okay.
But very briefly, we have a Discord channel, Editing from an Editor, where Jamie wants to talk about forced proximity. So everyone, please, if you want to keep this conversation going, please hop over to the Discord and, you know, talk away. Yeah, but before we say goodbye, where are you on social media if people want to keep up with you and learn more about you?
Jerry O. Wheeler on Facebook. I'm JW Den on Twitter. And that's it.
Awesome. Zelda?
You can find me basically everywhere at author Z Knight. And that's pretty much my handle everywhere. And I love to chat.
Fantastic. Val?
You can find me at Ghostal Service on Twitter. And I've tried to go to other platforms and I have failed. So that's the only place you can really find me. And my website is valentinewheeler.com. And
I have to
it's good
say,
to
I'm
look at Wizards in Space on Twitter too.
I'm really impressed by the fact that on your website you have your bio in English and French. And I was going to try and be smart and introduce you en français, but I was like, no, my high school French is just not up to the task.
I wrote it just in case my grandmother ever looks at my website. Hopefully she
Oh,
won't. I don't want her to know I write erotica, but it's fine.
that is lovely. Okay, well, thanks again. I have had a really fun time talking with you all and learning more about how you approach the editing process. Um, yeah, please join us on Discord for further discussion. And in the meantime, what do we have coming up next? We have, let's see, we have sci-fi and fantasy readings. And we also have a reading that I'm taking part of, The Queer Character Doesn't Die in the End, which is queer horror and should be a blast. So yeah, thanks again. And yeah, hope to see you again throughout the day.
I'll see you in a panel in about 3 hours.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.